Hi, so welcome to this LinkedIn Live, the secrets behind the perfect tech implementation and tackling the most common fears of hospitality operators. And I know this is a subject that so many people in hospitality ask the questions from every day. So I thought it'd be a fantastic topic to bring together some great people in the industry from very different perspectives to talk about this subject. And we really invite anyone who's listening and watching to fire your comments to us. We'd be more than happy to have a look at it. As we said, this is for the operator to give them the opportunity to learn how to do the perfect tech implementation. So every Wednesday and Friday, we join the Digital Hospitality Clubhouse room with Sean Walchef and Troy, who's on the panel today as well. And we always start the show by having 60 seconds on stage to say who we are and what we do. So I thought it was a great way to start this panel as well in true fashion. So Chris, I'm going to start with you. 60 seconds, who you are, what you do, and why you're here today.
Okay, 60 seconds. Hello all, evening. My name's Chris Fletcher. I am the owner of Tech on Toast. Tech on Toast is a community that I've been building for last year, which helps you buy and manage your tech. We simplify it. We do that through our content, through our podcast, brunches, and we have a supplier marketplace where a lot of, in fact, Market Man, who are here today, feature on as well. I've been 20 years in the industry in operations, and during the pandemic, decided to come out and do something like this and work with you lovely tech people and operators. So hello, everyone, and that's me. Did I beat the 60?
I think you did okay there. I think you did okay. But the key is to meet the 60, Chris, and have your moment on the stage. So don't rush. Matt, over to you. 60 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Scott. And Chris, thank you for the introduction as well. My name is Matt. I'm the VP of Sales and Partnerships here at MarketMan. For those of you that don't know about MarketMan, we help restaurant operators lower their costs and automate tasks with inventory and recipe software. So we sit at the intersection of technology and operations. We connect POS, distributors, and all back office activities into one platform. My role really revolves around helping these hospitality operators simplify all of these processes and enable their businesses to take the technology, save time, save money, and gain access to better information and reporting. Thanks for having me on today, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Troy, you know how to do this, so over to you, 60 seconds.
Thanks, Scott, and good day, everybody. Troy Hooper, I'm the CEO and founder of Kiwi Restaurant Partners. We are a brand scaling consultancy. We're really your outsourced C-suite to help you scale your emerging brand from wherever you are to wherever you want to go. And we hold your hand and take you through that process from our experience and having done it across over 100 brands and our team's experience all over 25 to 35, even 40 years in the business. In that vein, our largest client is Pepper Lunch Restaurants, and I'm actually the CEO of Pepper Lunch in North America and the co-CEO globally. It's a 508 unit brand. We're growing 5 units a month every month. It's a Japanese hot plate concept that's been here in the United States for 5 years and is about to explode. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And I just realized that Pepper Lunch was in Australia, and I'm heading there at Christmas. So I'm looking forward to trying it out as well, Troy.
We have 11 locations in Australia.
Perfect. Sydney and Adelaide. I think I've got 2 well covered there. So looking forward to that one. So I guess let's dive straight into the subject. And, you know, one of the big things that we always see, and I did a post yesterday on LinkedIn about how we're in the digital age. We use smartphones every day, but often when it comes to our hospitality businesses, we find that people fear using tech to advance their business, to grow their business, to operate their business. And it comes across so many times. Chris, you're obviously dealing with operators on a day-to-day basis with Tech on Toast. What are some of those fears, and why do you think people fear implementing tech into their operations?
I think a lot of it is fear of the unknown half the time, that actually operators live for their guests, right? I mean, I've been doing it all my life pretty much. And the most important thing they can do is make sure the guests have a great time. And I think when you're kind of staring down the barrel of tech and you're thinking, what am I going to implement and how am I going to do it? It's fear that you might actually make a mistake, or you might do some damage to all the work you've put in. And then alongside that, you've got the cost, implementation, and understanding of what you're about to do. So The cost of it is unknown. I was just talking to Scott off air before we come on about buying tech and some hidden surprises that you come across sometimes when you're about to buy something. So onboarding costs, hardware costs, software costs you may not know about, all of a sudden pop up and your project suddenly becomes a bit more expensive. And also the referencing they do. A lot of these guys, it's a very small community hospitality, although it's very big. And a lot of people talk to each other. A lot of people share stories, good and bad. And I think sometimes that can be off-putting for some customers. But I think most operators have got it right. They know tech is here. They're very aware of the benefits of what it can do for their business. And I think slowly especially since the pandemic, it's really started to move people forward. But I think there's a lot more educated to be done. There's a lot more informing to be done. And I think there's a lot more proof in the pudding about ROI from our tech suppliers to prove that actually what they're installing can do the job that you want it to do. So yeah, I think fear of the unknown is where I put a banner on top of that.
That's a good point. And Matt, from your side, obviously you're speaking on the other side to operators all the time. What are the common fears what are the common questions that you get asked about implementation from a tech perspective?
So it's an interesting question, Scott. I echo what Chris is saying. I really think it comes down to two things. It's number one, the switching costs, and number two, the adoption challenges, right? Which is a cost of time. And I think that a lot of the folks that we are dealing with, they've mentally gotten over the hurdle that this is a platform that they want to get started with. It is time to adopt technology. It is time to get into the 21st century, for lack of a better phrase. But they perpetually put it off. They will get to it next month. It's not in this quarter's budget. They'll get to it next year. And a lot of that is just, kicking the can down the road. So what we try to do to combat that is really hold their hand every step of the way and work with folks like Chris, actually, to make sure that implementation is seamless. And a lot of it is fear of the unknown, like you mentioned, Chris. So what we do to combat that is create an outcome plan, which is essentially just a project plan over the course of the next 13 weeks, let's call it, and very clearly, carefully, and concisely assign tasks, projects, milestones, KPIs of this is what we're going to do first, this is what we're going to do second, this is what we're going to do third. It helps create a team environment, it helps with assignment, and it helps, take the bullets out of the gun, so to speak, to disarm this entire situation. Tech and changes, they can be scary, but you have very capable vendors and operators here to help you along that way.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think, Troy, from your perspective, and I know last year, I think it was at the Restaurant Tech Show that you did a keynote about how to implement without a CTO. And I know, especially in emerging brands and scaling brands, often the decisions come down to the founders, to the operators who don't necessarily have that digital tech experience. And I know I found myself in these shoes quite a bit in terms of learning as you go and sometimes learning from those mistakes. So I guess a lot of people watching this will be in that position where they want to pick up tips from us today because they aren't CTOs, they aren't IT managers. What would be your advice in terms of how you challenge that and some of the bits that came up in the keynote that is important for today's subject?
Yeah, and to piggyback off of Chris and Matt's answer, I would say it the same thing in a slightly different way, and to say that what I find is people are either overwhelmed, because I'm going to answer your question by telling you how to go about doing this and hopefully prevent from becoming overwhelmed. And I was overwhelmed, and I've been studying restaurant technology almost full time for over 2 years, right? And I've definitely been deep into it for about 4 years. I can kind of remember when I said, okay, this tech thing is really getting beyond R365. It's more than point of sale and accounting, and now there's all these other things coming to bear that are really valuable. Let's start learning about those and staying on top of that. Staying on top of that has become nearly a full-time job. And so I find that operators are easily overwhelmed because the choices are too many. And they really succumb to paralysis by analysis, right? Or analysis paralysis. I think you say that both ways. And so they do nothing, right? At the end of the day, the result of both of those scenarios is they stop and they do nothing. And so my suggestions and tip would be get help. I got help, and I've been doing this for a long time. you just cannot do it all by yourself as a single person operator running your business, or even if you're a small group or a small team. At what point are you big enough to have a CTO or a project manager, somebody capable and qualified that's done this before? That's a pretty heavy lift from a cost basis and a skill point basis. So most people out there are dealing with this on their own, or appointing somebody within their team that might have a little more capability. The answer is get help. And whether that's calling somebody like Chris, or in the US, Skip Kimball, or Carl Orsborn, or Meredith Sandlin, or it's working closely with somebody else as a mentor in the business. Call other restaurateurs. When you meet restaurateurs at conferences and expos, sit down with them, say, hey, can I pick your brain? You're much bigger than me. How did you get from where I am to where you are on this technology track? How did you make those decisions? How did you even find these companies? What mattered to you? What should I be worried about looking for? To Chris's point, what are the unknowns that I don't know? Because basically you're walking into a scenario where everybody you talk to knows 10x what you know. And so you don't have the upper hand in that knowledge gap. And so A, you're going to be overwhelmed. B, you're going to be paralyzed. And C, and most concerning, is you're going to be fearful of being taken advantage of, or not understanding what it is you're evaluating. So if you don't understand it, how can you even evaluate the single product, out alone comparing products, right? And so the answer is get help, whether it's from a restaurateur mentor or a hired gun like Chris and others I mentioned. Or you get lucky and you get somebody like a Matt, who's a consultative seller or a consultative partner, who can really help guide you in what you should be thinking about and looking for.
Yeah, 100%. That's great advice. And I guess before we start talking about implementation, we have to talk about choice. And you can't implement without making decisions. Chris, talk me through the process that you go through when you sit with your clients for the first time and start talking tech and digital implementation.
First of all, I'm down. But no, I think it's, and I think then the question was, what's the perfect tech stack? And I think the answer is different for everybody potentially, because you can look at products where everything's in one place. Some of the providers are offering that, or you can look at best in class in each scenario. So it's really working out what it looks like. And for me, that's about mapping out the on-premise, off-premise solution and literally visualizing your tech stack. So take out all the suppliers, park all those guys for a minute. They're lovely, but put them over here for a minute and look at what does our tech stack look like. So from a bird's eye view, map out your data flow and your customer touch points all the way through your business. And it really, when I do that with the operator, it really helps them go, okay, I get it. That actually makes sense. And that could work for enterprise or for a single site business. So, and the good news is that actually, as Troy just said, these tech suppliers are really cool. Tech is improving every day. They're iterating. I mean, I worked briefly for a Deliverect last summer, and they're iterating every day, right, on product. They're constantly pushing to make their products better for the operators. So the good news is there's really good solutions out there, but you need to get informed. You need to find out as much information as you can. A hired gun, I love that. I'm now going to put that as my LinkedIn title. You get a hired gun and get some support. I think I did a survey recently with the database at Tech on Toast. 82% of operators said they reference other operators when they're buying tech. And really interesting. And I know that probably seems like an obvious stat, but actually, that's basically saying that nearly all operators are ringing down the road to their peers, as Troy mentioned then, saying, what do you use? Does it work? Would it work for me? And that's great, but as long as those people were informed who bought it. So it's really about doing your homework and making sure. On top of that, for the perfect tech stack, integration is something we'll probably talk about a lot today. It's key. You've got to make sure that whatever you're building can flow together and talk together. And from that, you get rich data, which is absolute power. If you've got rich data, you can tell a lot of great stories to your customers and do a lot of great things with internally as well. So, and finally, yeah, use a marketplace. I have a marketplace, obviously, and third-party help where you can go and spend some time, review, educate yourself on some of the platforms. I do the podcast purely to educate myself. I've spent, I think Troy said then 2 years doing the podcast. And I've learned more in that time just listening to brilliant tech suppliers and operators talk to me about what they do. That actually, if I can do it and I was an operator, I reckon then we can do that for most people. But third-party help will definitely get them there.
Yeah, I think that goes for a lot of things, doesn't it? In terms of third-party help, sometimes that objectivity coming into your business can really help you see things in a different perspective. Matt, what would you say was the key advice you would give to operators?
So, I really want to echo everyone's sentiments here. We have primarily an inbound business. So that means we're not knocking on doors and making 200 cold calls a day. We're on the receiving end of a bunch of inbound inquiries, people asking for help, looking to learn more, looking to solve some challenges. As Troy said, it's a very consultative sale. So people are going online and they're Googling, they're going into marketplaces, they're searching for and discovering the best solutions that fit with their needs. They're going to Capterra and G2 Crowd and other software review sites to look at unbiased third-party either editorial reviews or customer reviews to see, whether or not we can even help them. And then usually the first step is a deep dive discovery, right? It's an exploratory call where we try to understand, there's this large spectrum of software for restaurant management. Where do you fit? What's your appetite for change? What's feasible for you? What's your budget? What challenges are you trying to solve? And once we understand what challenges we're trying to solve, we can understand historically how you've done that. What's the economic impact of making these changes? Personally, for you as the operator, what time will this free up? And once we're able to truly understand all of these motivating factors, we're able to make the best recommendation. And sometimes that recommendation isn't us, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. And someone in the comments has said that to an extent in terms of, so many salespeople speaking at operators, which can be quite overwhelming. And sometimes it's what you want to sell rather than what the operator needs. It is a common issue. I've faced that. I'm sure Chris, over your time, and Troy, as operators, we've seen that. Like, how do you talk to your teams about that process in terms of finding the pain points of the potential customer, and then how you help them understand how to navigate that? Because it is back to that old thing of sales, isn't it? Find the pain points, show how you can solve them, add value, and it becomes a no-brainer from a decision perspective.
Sure. That's a good point, Scott. I think that we've had no choice over the course of the past many years to move away from this disingenuous way of selling, kind of spin selling, using a customer's pain against them, to just helping them make the right decision, a much more consultative approach. Typically, we won't go into a product demonstration without at least 30 minutes of detailed discovery. We want to understand every aspect of the business. This is an operational software. It has to do with how you take your stock counts, how you submit your purchase orders, how you receive and reconcile your deliveries, how you manage all of your recipes. Integral parts of your day-to-day operations. So we need to understand all of that before fitting it into your normal day-to-day operating procedures.
Perfect. And Troy, I think looking today, I guess with so much tech on the market, so many different platforms, EPOS, inventory, HR, kiosks, loyalty, I can keep going on and on and on. Is there such a thing as tech overload in a business? And how do people know they're there?
Yeah, there absolutely is. Now, some people overload themselves for different reasons. It comes down to my recommendation is identify the problems you need to solve and identify the problems that are going to move a needle. It's not just a nice to have, a cool trick. It's a fun thing. It's a marketing gimmick, right? To be able to say you have something that your neighbor doesn't have, but that actually it's got a business purpose. It's going to make a difference in your business, bring efficiency, reduce labor costs, improve, time spent by management or supervisors on solving those problems or doing those tasks more efficiently. Ask the questions first to find the solutions from it, right? That for me is really the way to avoid overwhelm and paralysis, but also a way to combat sort of that sales process of, these companies are going to tell you what their best features are and what they're most excited about. But the best ones are going to ask you, like Matt just said, a lot of questions about what your operation looks like, what things you're struggling with or could get better at or could improve and appreciate in your business. And it doesn't always have to solve for money, right? It doesn't always have to solve for time. It could be, a convenience factor for your staff, for your customer, etc. But identify the list of problems you want to solve, prioritize those, and that'll help you prioritize the tech you're looking for. And then to your question, the real answer is one at a time. One thing at a time. Take something on, understand it deeply, implement it well, train everybody, and do it well first before you take on the next thing. And to that point, I want to make it very clear. I think it's extremely important to involve all the stakeholders. If you're talking about, a scheduling system like 7 shifts, right, versus something else, or you're talking about inventory management versus something else, or you're talking about checklists, digital checklists, please involve the staff that are going to use it. Involve the customer who's going to interact with it. Involve the management who's going to have to manage it and actually be the ones that use it. Get the stakeholders' perspective and input. Understand their problems on the ground, not what you think they are.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I shared an example the other week of I was with a client in a business, and the F&B guys were completely overwhelmed. And when we delved into it, they were still working manual process on inventory and purchase orders. And when we started speaking to people, and then when we presented it to the exec team, they all thought that the advantage of the system was going to be the saving on food cost and beverage cost. But actually the true saving was going to come in the fact that inventory system being implemented was actually going to give back the F&B guy 30 hours of time a month. And my pitch to them was, if he uses this 30 hours and spends that with his team, whether that's training, meaningful conversations, or just being present, imagine how much power that could do in terms of guest service, guest experience, and revenue generation. So I think it's a really valid point in terms of what the sales pitch savings could be. Don't always necessarily correlate to your specific business unit case, right, Chris? It's really particular to what your particular pain points are, going back to that subject.
Yeah, and I would like to say that the CFO will bring you in, but the team will kick you out. That's the way I look at hospitality tech, right? That you might get it brought in from an exec board level will decide we need this, but I can guarantee you those girls and boys on the floor, if they don't like it, or if something's not going right, or their life's getting more difficult, they'll be the ones knocking on the door, getting you kicked back out. And I think it's quite easy to get there as well. I think it's very easy to overlay tech onto tech because you're trying to fix certain problems, but one thing I didn't say before was about starting with the end in mind, really understanding. I think the guys have covered it since then, really thinking, what is my overall solution? And the benefits from automating mundane tasks. I think DeliverAct, and I hate to use their name again, sorry, it's not an advert for them, but they save, I think it worked out from the tapping of the buttons on the till to put the delivery orders through manually was like 60 seconds, and they worked it out over a period of time with a period of staff, and it suddenly becomes a really big deal. And I think if you can get that real meaningful data ROI, then actually it's a really good argument to say this tech's important. If it's just a vanity issue, then yeah, what are you doing? We're in the wrong place.
Right. I totally agree with that, Chris. Scott, I think you asked the question in the beginning, tech overload, right? Is it a reality or is it a myth? And I think that it is a genuine concern, right? I have to look at it through the lens as the tech guy, right? It is a genuine concern when you don't have a cohesive strategy, right? If you are just implementing tech for the sake of ticking a box, and then after it's checked off of your to-do list, you move on to something else, it's meaningless. You shouldn't have done it at all, right? If you have a cohesive strategy, if this is serving a true need of yours and you're willing to invest the time, the effort, the resources that it's going to take to implement it properly, then I believe tech overload is a myth, right? You can never have too much tech as long as it's all 100% implemented at a timeline that fits your needs, and that might take 5 years at the end of when everything is said and done.
Yeah, I mean, Troy, it's back to that famous saying, isn't it? And I put it on the questions for later, but it's an appropriate time. Garbage in, garbage out. How many times have you seen data that isn't clean and therefore isn't useful, or operators making decisions on data that just isn't real?
Well, it's shiny object syndrome, right? They grab it, it does one thing, they only use it for that one thing, and then they don't really understand the value of deeper implementation, value of deeper understanding. And to Chris's point earlier, they don't even consider often what the integration value is when that works with something else. Those two things together are, 1 + 1 is 3, and sometimes 1 + 1 is 5. But sometimes 1 + 1 + 1 is just +1 is just +1, and that's a problem, So, it's really about thoughtfulness. I like Matt's comment. It's strategy. You have to have a strategy. You have to have a list of problems, a plan to solve those problems, understand what it is you need or what would make it better to solve those problems. Go out, evaluate all of the options, and then understand how those options affect one another and have a very consistent, cohesive, and well thought out plan. And quite frankly, if you're not going to spend a year and go to FS Tech and Mertech and every other show and spend hundreds of hours online, you need to hire somebody. You need to ask for help. You need to get a multitude of inputs besides just salespeople at tech companies. No offense, I have a lot of friends that do that and own those businesses. Zach Oates at Ovation for one, right? And my friends at R365, Tony and the team, they're great human beings and they do mean well and they do want to solve your problems, but you have to be in charge of that process. And if you're not going to invest, find somebody who is going to take that on your team or bring them in from the outside.
And I wanted to say before, there's a phrase that I heard ages ago called "sweat your tech." Sounds horrific, but it's but really about getting the most out of your tech. So, Matt's on the call. You put Market Man is. Make sure you get every feature that's on that bloody website. Make sure you get everything you can out of it because it's built for a reason, right? And the reason that Market Man do what they do is because they're trying to solve X, Y, Z. So if that's what was sold you in the process, then go get it. And I think that's what Troy's talking about. This isn't just a plug and play. This is a plug, play strategy, plug, play strategy. It's constant evolving, constant iteration. I think that's the nature of tech, and that's why it requires, it requires third-party help, or it requires, you to be really informed. So if you're fortunate and you have that time, then go get it. But just sweat that tech and get that return.
Yeah, and I think that's back to that one system at a time that Troy was talking about, isn't it? Because, trying to do multiple, you're obviously going to dilute the focus that you have. And it's I've always found putting these systems in that it's constantly reviewing and iterating data and what it gives you from there that helps you succeed when you effectively come to use it down the line for reporting or data sharing, etc. So I think that's really good advice. I guess over to the topic of this, we've talked a lot about choosing the right tech stack and what goes into it. But in terms of the perfect implementation, and is there such a thing as perfect implementation, Chris? Is that there? Is the bumps in the road? And we've all opened restaurants.
No is the answer, because again, I like any piece of clothing that someone might like it and someone else might not like it. I think it's about planning, it's about strategy, it's about execution. This is where the third party part really comes in, actually, because it's going to take time. I mean, we bought HubSpot in one of my companies and we pay £2,000 a month for it. And we still don't even know 10% of what it can do. I mean, it's just, that thing's a monster, and we just haven't approached it the right way. And we've burnt cash for sure, definitely. So even people who think they know what they're doing struggle with this stuff sometimes. So it's about bringing in that strategy, that plan, and really working out what's best for you and also what's achievable in terms of your capacity, because capacity is a big factor here. If you're a 3-4 site location, or if you're 300-400, capacity can be reached quite quickly and be quite damaging if you're not doing it properly. So again, start with the end in mind, detailed brief, very detailed, that your supplier. So if Matt's coming to meet us, that Matt knows exactly what I'm trying to solve and then we put some stepping stones in across the way. I use something called the OGSM, which is a strategic objective goal strategy measure. I won't bore you with it, but that's how we would plan tech into a business. So we would look at the objective, what are the measurable goals, what's the strategy, where we're going to play, how are we actually going to do this, and then how are we going to measure that it's successful afterwards. So that's how we would implement tech. And it takes time, right? It's a long process, and one at a time is the best thing I've heard. And also use pilot sites. Don't try and, roll out across 20 sites at once. It's madness. Use a pilot site, test, find the problems, because there will be problems. Definitely. Not saying the tech doesn't work. There will be problems with your nuances in your operations that don't suit what you thought you were buying. So then you've got time to work that out with the supplier. And probably the most important thing is a bit of hand-holding and feedback. It's like any good relationship. If you're not feeding back to each other constantly, you tend to end up getting divorced, right? And no one wants that. So it's really about that constant feedback in that implementation that you're saying, this doesn't work, or I'm struggling. Because a lot of the time, the bit where the operator thinks it's broken, it's not broken. It's just being approached the wrong way. The supplier can help you, but it needs to be done correctly. So I could probably talk for an hour on this, Scott, but I won't. But yeah, I think the key thing here is working together and the feedback.
Yeah, and Troy, you're going through the process now with Pepper Lunch in terms of choosing your tech stack. And what's the plan in terms of then implementing it? And how do you go about implementation on tech with your clients and what you're about to do with Pepper Lunch?
We're hiring somebody. Chris not doing it.
Chris?
I take my own advice, right? We actually have a tech recruiter first looking for a implementation project manager, somebody who's actually done this before. Now, we're a little unique, right? I'm going to implement with my team here in the US, our 6 US stores and 1 in Canada. So our 7 stores, we can manage that, right? We are going to do 1 store first, but that is 7 stores, 3 franchisees, right? And so a lot easier to manage, right? But then I have, that's 2 countries. So then I have 13 other countries and 501 other stores. We own 126 of them. The rest is multi-unit and individual franchisees. That's where the head explodes, right? And so that's a different level of scale. That is not the problem most people watching this are going to have. So we are definitely bringing some help on board, but we're going to know it. We're going to know how to do it ourselves, so that we understand that we have the right person to also do it with and for us. And so you've got to have both. You've got to get your hands dirty. You got to roll up the sleeves. You've got to Chris's point, have what they call a lab, have a test site, have a single point of truth. And then again, back to the stakeholders, as I sit here and as you guys are talking, think about as an operator and go out and experience. Go to all of these restaurants. If you're looking at, I need a kiosk in my QSR fast casual, go to every restaurant you can find that has kiosks. Go to Shake Shack, go to Habit Burger, go to Mendocino Farms, go wherever, McDonald's, right? And experience it and make notes. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What works? What's missing? What did they miss thinking about, right? Is the screen too big? Is it too small? Is it too slow? Does it scroll left? Does it scroll right? Take these notes, and then you'll be better informed as a user, as an experiential user, to then when you start shopping for something, whatever that tech is, back to asking friends. Look, yes, we're all competitors, but we're also a small industry as big as we are. I think Chris or one of you said that. Ask for help and say, hey, I don't need the secret sauce. I don't want to see your books. I don't want you to show me anything you don't want to show me. But as a friend in the industry, you've just implemented this solution. Can I come and spend some time, or can I send my people to spend some time understanding how you did what you did, why you made the choices you did, why is it set up the way it's set up, so that I feel better informed about whether I want to do it that way or another way. So it just comes down to collaboration and external perspective and testing and playing and iterating. And by the way, it's never going to be done and it's never going to be right.
It never ends.
Because they're going to add a feature that you didn't have, right? Or you're going to realize the feature you want isn't there when you go to start implementing and utilizing. And you're like, oh, I didn't even think to ask that. Great. You know what's great too? I think Matt said it earlier. These folks want to work with you. Most of the iteration, most of the feature set additives that are in the roadmap, the pipeline, what they're working on, are actually customer requests. When their customers say, I need this, or this is important to us, or where are we in the roadmap of getting another feature or an added addition to an existing feature, make something more robust, they go to work on it. They will actually build it because you asked for it. And I don't think a lot of people realize how flexible these tech companies are to bringing the solutions you need, because if you need it, it's likely other people would want it too.
100%. That's probably a good place for Matt to chip in, right?
No, thank you. You guys are really just giving me these layups. You're really giving me these layups. But Troy, exactly like you said, I think that tech implementation is really no different than any other business process, right? You said that it never ends. You never finish. Correct. You're never going to be complacent in your business. You're never going to be stagnant. You're constantly going to be chasing the next piece of growth, the next step, iterating that process. So you'll get it to almost your desired outcome, right? Your first value, then your desired outcome, and then you move the goalposts, right? And we continue down that road. So for what we do, typically it's that land and expand model, like Chris was mentioning. You test, and then you test again, and then things break, and you fix them, and then you try again, and then you bring on your second location. Then a couple months later, you bring on your third location. And only when you're happy, you're successful, everything is palatable and easy for everyone, can you successfully roll everything out. And I think that there's a pretty big difference, and everyone listening on the call knows this when they've gone through a sales process, the expectations versus the reality. And the delta between the two sometimes is very, very great. So in our business, it's really just about expectation management and putting all of your cards on the table. There's no sense in hiding anything because they're going to know 5 minutes later or the next week or whenever it might be. So show your hand, collaborate with one another, communicate, have that continuous feedback loop. And if you manage expectations, you can get ahead of things.
Yeah, that's some really good advice. Really good advice on that one. And I think we've talked a lot about creating tech stacks, Chris, and starting afresh and really looking at everything objectively. How different is integration into a current tech stack versus starting with a blank piece of paper and putting everything together?
Well, I think it's much more difficult, but just because the nature of the age of what you might be plugging into, or the outcomes you've now decided you want to go to compared to where you were 5 years ago. It really interestingly, Marugame, who are a worldwide brand, but building in the UK at the moment and Europe, they did this thing called the single plate of truth. Someone mentioned the single source of truth. I think it was you, Troy. And they brought a load of tech suppliers together and said, look, we can't manage this. We don't know what to do. They put them all in a room. They facilitated the meeting, and they actually managed this process, basically saying, can you plug into you? Will it work? Can you do that? Oh, no, this doesn't work. Well, can you fix that and let me know when it's done? So it's a way of dealing with it where the opera takes control and literally says, right, you guys fix it. But when you're going new to old, it's about compatibility and it's about integration. It's those two things that pop up because you've potentially got hidden costs again in hardware. You've potentially got hidden costs in software upgrades, potentially, depending what you're plugging into. It's very if and but. And this is where the visualizing the tech stack that I talked about at the start is really important. You kind of get rid of all the suppliers for a minute and just look, what do we want to achieve? I know we've got this, but you might start out thinking, I want to buy this to plug into this. You might end up, a bit like Matt said then, in a totally different place where you're like, get rid of the lot and let's do it this way. So, but it's a big deal. It shouldn't be taken lightly. And I just think if you're going to scale, or if you're in a growth phase, if you're looking at growth, can you scale with the tech you've already got? And if the answer is no at this point, because what you bought 5 years ago maybe hasn't reached the potential that they thought they might, then you might have to change everything. But again, it's a strategy, it's a process, it's change management, and it's just about doing things correctly. I think that it's almost like we're giving the same answer, I suppose, to what we were giving on the new one, right? It's about that real project management style, people like you, Scott, who go into businesses and really kind of help people understand where they need to get to. I think it's the same thing. I think it's just really understanding the capabilities, and the honesty piece here, as Matt just pointed out, is really key, because your current provider is going to have to fess up and say, look, we can and can't work with these people, even though you want it. And that puts them in a difficult position, obviously. So then it's a decision to be made from the operator. So it's just that project management again, and compatibility and integration. Try saying that when you've had a beer.
Yeah, and you know, Dean LeBay brings up a really valid point. Technology means nothing if not implemented.
Yeah,
and you can't say any truer than that, right? It's useless if it isn't put into the business and then talks to everything and matches. And Troy, I guess that integration piece between your tech stack is super important, isn't it? there's no point in having one system in silo. Being able to take from every individual system and then I guess consolidating that into a format that operators understand when it then hits into reporting and that side of things is really key, isn't it? So I think how important is it that you not only look at functionality but look at how it produces data and how it can help you develop the business?
Yeah, I mean, data in silo is one of the biggest issues in the industry. For folks that were well ahead of the curve, to Chris's point, 5, 3, 2 years ago, if the technologies don't talk to each other, you're now trying to manage databases, information, reporting results from different things that don't talk to each other. And so you actually lose efficiency. It actually becomes a greater lift to manage that data and try to extrapolate meaningful information that you can act upon, right? Actionable intelligence. And so the integratable capabilities that, again, amplify the results is really, really important. Not just that you get clean data and data that you can understand and can make decisions on, but that you understand correlating data. When this happens, it affects this, 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 and this. And finally, we are starting to see some of these systems like MarketMan that are capable of reaching into the point of sale, the labor, the inventory, the prep, right, et cetera, and connect the dots to say, okay, when I raise a price by 5 cents, blah, 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 blah happens. When I buy a different product at this price, blah, blah, blah happens, right? And so that is where the power is. And without integration, and it is Pepper Lunch's and most brands' biggest issue is that they have a lot of tech. They have a lot of good tech. But if it doesn't talk to each other, if you don't have enterprise visibility, if we as the brand can't extrapolate that information, have visibility of what's going on in this region versus this country, that country, segment our stores into the stores that do X, Y, and Z in sales, they're very different, right? The labor model, the cost basis, the product, economies of scale at one store is very different from other stores. And so being able to segment your stores into these different sort of business units to evaluate how different decisions affect them differently. I'll give you an example. Our tech stack in Asia, we're having to sort of think and engineer the strategy, the rollout strategy, because the cost, what we're willing to pay in the United States for these economies of scale and efficiencies and this data and this information access is very different than what they're willing to pay in Japan. Basically, I'd say those are the two bookends. We're willing to pay the most. Japan's willing to pay the least. And all of our other Asian countries are somewhere in between. And so when we go to them and say, hey, this is the cost of the new tech stack, they like, what? Are you crazy? You have to understand the value. You have to sell the value. You have to appreciate the value. So the rollout and implementation in Japan is going to be different than in all the other countries. And it's okay. They'll see the benefits as the other countries roll things out. But we're not just talking about one tech stack rolled out into one set of stores in one country. For us, we're talking about a different strategy and a different rollout plan and a different problem set to solve for in every country. And therefore also different integration partners, right? To Chris's point, DeliverEct is huge in Asia and Canada and is growing in the United States. Tilster's huge in Asia and doesn't hardly exist in the United States. Other partners are equally capable, whether Revel point of sale or It's a Checkmate are equally capable in both sort of sides of the world. So, by the way, everybody works in Australia. So thumbs up if you go to Australia. You should generally see the best, I guess, because from what I find out, everybody wants a free vacation in Australia, so they're willing to open up Australia.
It's true. I never thought about that, but you're 100% right.
Yeah, Matt's written that down.
Australia really is the gateway. I've realized Australia is actually the connector between the two sides of the planet.
I guess, Troy, it throws up a really interesting point, though, and it's a point that I experienced when I was looking after 4 different countries from an operations perspective as COO. How important is it to align your tech stack across all of those regions into one? Or do you go with best in class in each region and consolidate through a Power BI, through a Tenzo, through these type of people? What's the most important from your perspective? And then I might share a little bit about kind of what we did as well.
Well, I had a big pie in the sky dream that I would select one tech stack that as long as I knew it worked in Asia, I knew it worked in the US, Canada, etc., and I knew it worked in Asia, if they did those two things, I could have one glorious tech stack, and we'd have one implementation team, and the home office people would know the entire, whatever it is their specialty area was, whether it was accounting or design or whatever it was, and that we would only have to teach everybody one thing once, right? Isn't going to work. I hoped it would. We're trying to consolidate and have as few different moving parts or few different variables on a global scale. I think it's as important as it can be. The answer is, if you have $3 to $5 million and you build your own global tech stack from the ground up with plugins from some of these best-in-class partners that can do global, great. You're a Chick-fil-A, you're a Shake Shack, you're a lot of things, right? But even the Burger Kings of the world have outsourced, right? And so they have found certain partners in certain regions. Tilster does Burger King everywhere except for the US, right? Go figure. So the answer is, it would be lovely, but I think we're still a ways away from that. These companies are still growing. They're still learning to integrate with each other. Some are really focused in different regions. Some have been stronger in other regions. And so I think we're a ways off from that perfect tech stack, right? And whatever that means, meaning you can go out and grab anything you want and it's going to work anywhere for anybody. It's just, that's a utopian dream. It may never come to pass. We're getting a lot closer to those capabilities, but it really depends on your needs. My needs were an office in Singapore having global visibility to all of our franchise operations and being able to extrapolate valuable data to help our operators improve their business and improve their bottom line, of course, increase their sales, which increases our royalties, which makes all of us stronger, makes us a better global brand that we can do more and move faster and grow and implement. That's the goal. And it's okay if, to Matt's point, we never achieve that goalpost, but we're going to push downfield, and we just know that we're going to have to juke and jive. We're going to have to move. The ball is, the game's going to change along the way, and we're going to have to be able to adapt to that.
Yeah, that's. I'll let you go first. So, and I'm glad, because it's similar to my experience. Yeah, not to be the one who makes the mistake first, but we did something a little. We owned all our sites, so we had 85 sites across 4 countries, 3 of them in the Middle East, and 2 in the Middle East, 1 in London, 1 in New York. And what we did was we used the same accounting software across all the regions. So from an accounting perspective, we could pull the same information, we could have the same charted set of accounts, etc. Things were being coded to the same places, and then we really looked at how we could go with best in class in each individual area and consolidate through Tenzo was the people we picked, but also I know there's Power BI, which takes a bit more looking after. And then the key there was how we could make things as visual as possible for our teams. So it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It then becomes about graphs. It then becomes about trends. It then becomes about really analyzing that data over a data set to try and, as you said, Troy, try and build value for the operators and make it as easy as possible for them to extract the data, as much as it is the central office team and the execs to extrapolate data as well. And Matt, I guess from the tech side of things and the supplier side, how important to you is giving the operator the visibility over data, and how much time is put into making that as user friendly as possible from a market man perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that is the desired goal. Getting access to the data. It's a system of inputs, it's a system of convenience. The goal is to save you time, but you need the analytics, you need the reporting, you need the data. It needs to be user-friendly, it needs to be intuitive, it needs to be universally available, right? Whether you are an operator on the ground lines, the person taking the inventory count, or if you're someone in your shoes, Scott, as the COO of an 85 location group, somewhere internationally in an office. So getting access to that is key. Now, harkening back to the question about tech integrations and localization and having this global approach, it's very difficult, right? Getting localized compatibility. You had 85 locations. I'm not sure if they were all across the same point of sale system. You mentioned the same accounting software, but there might have been some localization. So what we've done over the course of time is we've had no choice but to integrate and have kind of an all-encompassing approach. So we have localizations for MarketMan in 55 different countries across about 70 different POS systems, and those are available out of the box. And that came out of necessity, just to serve our customer base in the easiest way possible. And beware, just a word of caution to everyone, there's quite a big difference between an integration and the ability to integrate, right? So be careful for that buzzword. Ability is, we have the ability to build.
We have open AI.
Yeah, an open API. Exactly. All of us could build a rocket ship to the moon. Doesn't mean that we're going to actually do it. That's just one word of caution, and kind of goes back to everyone's original point, which is you got to test it out.
But
kick the tires.
I guess it's worth really going in on that one though, Matt, because I know this is one that people fall kind of guilty of and fall victim of quite a bit, is that integration and again the ability to integrate. We integrate, but actually the integration is very loose, or it doesn't integrate fully. What are the questions that people should be asking suppliers to make sure that these integrations are working properly? Because it's a big one, isn't it?
It's definitely a big one. The workflow. What are the inputs and the outputs? I think Troy was mentioning it before. If you make a change to a menu price in the point of sale, how does that reflect onto the recipe cost in your inventory system? Is it connected? Is that happening once per day? Or is there a manual Excel file that you need to import into a system, once per week? There's quite a huge difference there, right? So you need to understand those questions about the frequency, the functionality, what the actual workflow is, and what the expectation is on your side. Now, most tech operators that are reputable, if it's a clean, easy to use integration, you should be able to get it set up in under 24 hours. Snap your fingers, and that could be included in your trial. So give it a try.
Yeah, someone told me once there's integrations and then there's integrations.
There's quite a big difference, Chris, between integrations and integrations.
Yeah, exactly.
So understanding the subtlety is a delicate art.
I would say a lot of my friends who worked in the industry wouldn't even know what API meant up till 3 years ago. Maybe the pandemic obviously blew everything up. People had time and had to get tech to open, right? They had to buy tech to get the doors open. So I think the whole glossary, I remember we published a glossary a while ago on API integration, what it actually meant, the dictionary meaning. And I had a CFOs messaging me privately, I must say, saying, I get it. But they're sitting in boardrooms making big decisions. So I think the whole education piece around integrations, depending on the level you're trying to educate, is important.
Right. It's important. It's important to not use it as a buzzword, right? Like you said, in a boardroom on a PowerPoint presentation, to just, again, check the box that you are quote unquote integrated without it meaning anything. So ask the tech vendor, what does that integration mean? How many customers do you have live that are using this platform? If the answer is hundreds or thousands, great. That's perfect. If they say, well, you'd be the first and we're willing to do that with you, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, right? We have done that dozens of times. But that is a painful process, and you need to manage those. It is a huge lift, and it's not going to take between now and tomorrow. That's going to take a few months.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we're coming to the end now. And there's a couple of questions just to fire at you, but I want to focus on one last subject, which is something that is true to my heart. I know with Chris and Troy as well, which is team and team engagement. As you said, Chris, can be the reason behind great implementation or a system just purely failing. And I've been in operations where it just hasn't worked for the team, and we've failed. Great systems do what they should do, but the team just haven't taken to it. If we just go around the table and kind of, Chris, if you start, what's your tips to engage the team and get the team involved in terms of making it a success from a tech perspective?
Like any kind of, like a menu. So what makes me laugh, if you do a menu change in a restaurant, you pull all the waiters and waitresses and chefs together, you spend months planning it, you then have them all test the menu, cook the food, taste the food, feedback, go again, go again, go again. We buy a piece of tech, we buy it in the boardroom, we plug it in on the floor, and we're surprised when it fails. So I think it's all about that, again, about that project management from the start. Guys, we're looking at buying this to improve revenue, which will increase hours for you, which will make this more efficient, remove this mundane task from your job. Can you buy in? We're doing it in a pilot site with our #1 waiter in the company who's going to approve this and put his face on the front of it. You know, it's about really saying, getting these key stakeholders, I think someone mentioned before. When we go into brands with Tech on Toast, we do a free audit. We do a free tech audit of their brand, and they on a competency rating against each product they already have. We then go and do a discovery session where we sit with key stakeholders and we ask them, what are the operational wins and what are the operational losses if we took this away or put this in? And it's about they're in charge, not you. They're in charge of what should happen. And if they're bought in and you do it slowly and do it in a lab fashion, as Troy said, in a way that's contained, and you can see the wins, then you can report those wins back to the organization. They want it rather than giving it. So they're saying, we want what Bristol have got. We want what Dubai have got. We want what London have got, because look at their results. Look at what's happening there. Look at this, what they're saving, or look at what they're making. So it's just about that controlled fashion and getting the key stakeholders bought in. Adoption's everything. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Yeah, 100%. Troy, your perspective?
Yeah, I'll just add to that by saying it's never too soon to do that. Right? It's before you've picked the tech or the solution. Take the entire team, sit them in a room, buy them lunch. What problems could we solve for you, team? What things could be more efficient? Right? Most of the people who work for you are under 40, right? And so they're going to have technology ideas, right? They're going to be aware of things. They're going to send them to a conference, send 2 or 3 people. I like the idea of a committee, right? 1 customer, 1 waiter, 1 bartender, 1 chef, 1 busboy. I don't care who it is. 1 dishwasher. Get a diverse group of people in your business together. Ask them to be a part of the solution process, and ask them to be the advocates and the ambassadors to go get that information off the floor and from the back of the house and from whoever, and get them involved as early as possible. Now you have a problem set. You can whittle that down. You can prioritize it. You can then start looking and involve them in the entire process. It's a committee. They meet once a month or whatever it is, and let them help ask the questions, because you don't know what you don't know. And the more brains involved in, the more people that don't know will ask more questions that will lead to more discovery. Yes, this takes longer. Yes, this is more laborious. Yes, this is more thoughtful and considerate. But when your entire team across the entire diversity of the job sets has had some hand involvement or say in the process, they will own it. And then when it's ready to implement it, they will have sold it to their team members on their respective departments. And everyone will be more excited, interested, and invested in making it work. They'll help you make it work, rather than complain, avoid, and ignore it.
Yeah, great point. And I guess, Matt, first question, how many times do you see that happen? And what would be your perspective on this as well?
No, it's a really great question. We don't see it as often as we need to see it, right? That's the honest truth. That being said, when we do see exactly what Troy and Chris just said, which is, to summarize, number 1, involve the users in the decision, get an acceptance process. Number 2, comprehensive training. And then 3rd, I'll add in gamification and reporting. Whenever we implement a new tool, even in our a sales tool, let's call it, we want to incentivize its use. We want to reward good behavior, and report on it and talk about it at the top level, right? That really incentivizes and motivates people to move forward. A lot of this process is getting the users out of their own way, right? They need an acceptance process. So if they're involved in the decision, if they understand what the impact will be and the steps that are going to get there, it becomes far more agreeable across the board. But Scott, the short answer to your question is we don't see it all the time. The savviest of operators know that trifecta, and they try to implement it and involve more people in the decision, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's some great advice on that, especially with the team. So if we got a couple of questions here. The first one from Abby Dunn. So love the advice of prioritizing problems and handling one at a time. Have you seen greater success come from prioritizing customer-based tech or employee-based tech? Who would like to fire off? Chris?
I have an opinion on employer-based tech. So I don't think it's moved forward in the last decade, if I'm honest. I think the market mans, the e-commerce, the guys who are really kind of doing some really interesting stuff I think are brilliant. And I think there's a lot of intuitiveness, and when we're talking about kids who work in the business, they probably understand how to use that a bit better than HRIS, sorry, and that kind of tech. It's getting better, and some really interesting players coming in. A chap called Yuda, who I know Abby. I know will know Abby. There's a business called Yuda. Check them out. Who are really cool. Who are connecting those dots in HR. Who are going to make telling stories about who was on shift, what they did, what results they had. There's some really interesting stuff coming from Matt Grimshaw and his team there. But I see prioritizing employees always first over customers, in my own opinion. That's what I always did as a manager and as a director, that I always put them first, and it should be the same in tech. I just feel the tech is further behind.
Yeah, it's a great point, Matt. I know you're a B2B and a customer-based system, but from Market Man internally, what would you say to answer that question?
Repeat the question just so I can make sure that I understand it. Truly.
Yeah. So, have you seen greater success come from prioritizing customer-based tech or employee-based tech?
It's really a toss-up, and it depends on what your desired outcome is, right? If your problem set is geared towards your employees, we need to solve them first. If your customers are unhappy, we need to work with them toward first. And it's kind of this balancing act constantly, where one priority is constantly getting in the way of the other, and we need to strike a unique balance between the two.
Yeah, it's a good response. And Troy, finally from you.
Neither, if it isn't done correctly and well.
Fair enough.
Look, there's great examples on both sides that it's done well. And Sean berated me yesterday to continue to call out the brands loudly, even though that's very dangerous to do. But as a consumer, I've experienced brands recently who've implemented customer tech, and the line did not move from the cashier to the kiosk, or the experience at the table or at the booth in a full service was worse than it was without the tech at the table. It didn't do what they thought it would do, or it actually created additional barriers or problems that I didn't think they were aware of. So it really comes down to implementation and training and buy-in, as we've said, because I'd say 95% of the time, nobody does that perfectly or really, really well. Even if they do, are they doing it on the one feature set they bought it for? Because I think the thing we can all agree on is no matter how well the tech was implemented, the likelihood of it being used to its capacity of capability is zero. I think we use tech at about 10% of its value in most cases. So there's always a journey. This is a long, long journey to go down. And so it doesn't matter which one, neither one is going to be more or less impactful if it's not implemented strategically and has good and proper intent and has the proper buy-in and long-term strategic plan to make it work for you and achieve the goals that you bought it for.
Yeah, I'm with you on that in terms of tech. There's a big national chain here. In fact, actually, they're a global chain who implemented QR codes at the table. And when you were in the restaurant, you could see that it was more about staff efficiency than it was guest experience. And I think customers see through it when the poor people left in the restaurant are probably more stressed than they were beforehand by being understaffed, right? Because they think that this saviour's here, and actually it doesn't support them at all. So I think it brings up a really valid point about back to that. What pain point are you answering, and is it an employee pain point or is it a customer pain point, and how do you make the experience better for both? I think that's probably sums that up quite well as well. So I guess that's brought the end of the session. thank you very much for coming on. It was a subject that I really thought was worthwhile talking about, and I think we probably could go on for much longer talking about this. So again, really appreciate it. I guess just before we go, give everyone the opportunity to find you online. Chris, how does someone find you if they want to implement tech in the UK?
They can find me on our website, which is techontoast.community, or you can email me direct at chris@techontoast.community.
Perfect. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, that's easy. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search my first name and last name. Go to marketman.com, or you can email me directly, either matt@marketman.com or matt@mealticket.com. Our parent company, we're a brand under that umbrella.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. And Troy?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably most easily discoverable. Troy Hooper with a J in front of it. A little secret people don't know, but click on it through this link, and that's the easiest if you're watching this. But Troy@krpusa.com is an email. krpusa.com is the website. And I'm, of course, also at pepperlunchrestaurants.com here in the US. I'm, as Sean likes to say, weirdly available.
And I can definitely vouch for that. So yeah, for sure. Everyone catch people on this call and learn more about tech. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for checking in on the LinkedIn Live as well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Great.
Thank you.